Hello, my name is Naomi Gale and I am a holistic pelvic health specialist and doula birth keeper where I support at birth and postnatally. And today I really want to discuss what it means to protect your bubble. What does that mean? So there are going to be many examples within this video on the types of bubble, the types of things, people, experiences that you can protect yourself from to keep your bubble intact. So I like to use the term bubble because a bubble is a very delicate space. The bubble that we create can be popped really easily, and that can come from a range of energy or multiple energies at once. And this is the problem that we have during pregnancy. So really, I'm speaking to protecting the bubble from the beginning, not just talking about pregnancy at the end. I'm talking about pregnancy from the beginning. So what I like to really remind people of is that you're not necessarily going to have a birth plan straight away, be aware of exactly everything that you want from the beginning, but you are going to have some kind of awareness around what you're looking for your birth to be. Even if it's a subconscious awareness, say like, you're speaking about, well, maybe I'll just be happy with this, but actually underneath it, you're like, no, this is what I really want my birth to be like. So I really want to speak to the pregnancy, the birth, and the postnatal time and how we protect that bubble. So first of all, there is a lot of energy that comes in when we're pregnant. There's a lot of opinions and a lot of stories and a lot of experiences. The first thing to do to protect your bubble is to avoid stories. We do not want to hear stories. We don't want to hear about them. We want to hear stories that if we go to say a birth circle, so I run a free community birth circle, I try to pick carefully with those who are sharing their stories so that it informs people in a really positive way. So for example, I might have a story about a VBAC. Great, we really want to hear about a vaginal birth after a cesarean. We want to hear those positive stories. But we do not want to hear your friend's story who's just given birth and had an induction. We don't want to hear that. And how do we deal with that? Because this is a friend and then they're like, oh, I want to share this story because I want to offload. Well, that's part and parcel when somebody hasn't had the time and space to debrief from their birth, right? So they haven't had that time and space to debrief. So then they utilize friends and family and anyone that's willing to listen to debrief from their birth. And this is the problem that we have in today's society when there are very few positive stories. Induction rates are through the roof, cesarean sections are through the roof, and we're trying to have spontaneous physiological birth. I have to ignore my neighbour's jet wash. So when we are on this trajectory, when we hear someone's negative story, and they are negative in some respects because it's going to be an offload, a challenge, it's not going to be a spontaneous physiological birth. When we hear those stories, they start to plant seeds. So what we do is we say, do you know what? I really want to hear your story. I really want to hear it, but I'm wondering whether we can debrief with that story after I've given birth because I'm just trying to hold a lot. Or perhaps you can just tell me something that you've left with that makes you feel like really just joyous from that experience that you had, and I'd love to hear the rest of it later on when I've given birth myself. It's just ways and means of protecting yourself with boundaries, right? Boundaries are also really what we're referring to with protecting our bubble, and often we come at pregnancy with a very few boundaries or understanding of boundaries. So stories are one way. The second way is protecting yourself from family. So how do you allow yourself to be in pregnancy without the input of family? So I could be referring to your immediate family or greater family, or a family member who is within the medical profession of some sort. I mean, I had a sister-in-law who is a midwife, for example. So how do we protect ourselves from those stories? So in order to do that, we have to acknowledge that we don't have to tell them everything. We don't have to tell our mums everything, our dads everything. We don't have to tell the ones that love us everything, because they can derail and they can sow seeds that do not allow us to really truly surrender into the birth that we want. So we try to avoid not telling them everything. there are people who will need to hear what you are dealing with. And if you have that kind of close relationship with your mum, that could be quite a lot if you're trying to deal with that. And I definitely have clients who are navigating that. But we have to acknowledge that they don't need to know everything. And that when we offload on them, because we're like used to doing that, and we then get backlash with, well, why aren't you doing that? Or why aren't you having this? Or I had that. Or do you remember when I had that? It starts to sow seeds. So here's a really, really good example. If your mum had something during her birth, does not mean you're going to have it in yours. And even if it's something that then can be like passed down, it still doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to have it. So do you need to hear her wax lyrical about that experience to make you fear that this is going to happen to you? This is your pregnancy and that was her pregnancy. And so we have to navigate that journey with like, how do we include them in the pregnancy, but without having to share the stories and the appointments that we've just had and any of the fears that are coming up? How can we direct that to somebody else? And this is where the role of the doula really steps in, because if you have a doula in that space, then you're able to speak to the doula and the birth keeper around everything that you need to speak to, so that you don't feel the need to offload it with your mum. And then we can navigate, and this is what I often end up with, is navigate those stories and how we share those stories with those around us. And we can talk about that within sessions, right? So it's really, really important to acknowledge that. And then we have to protect ourselves from medical professionals, the bubble of that. So in order to protect ourselves from medical professionals, here's what you have to remember, is that you have the choice of scans. You have the choice of whether you get induced, and you have the choice of what you go to appointment-wise. You don't have to go to every midwife appointment. You don't have to go to scans. You don't have to have the baby's Doppler heart rate checked, your blood pressure checked. You can turn down the gestational diabetes check. Here's what's really important. Here's look at somebody who wants to have a home birth, does not want to be labelled high risk, so that they refuse to send midwives to their home birth, or wants to go to the midwifery-led unit and doesn't want to go into the labour ward, but also cannot be labelled high risk. You are going to have to protect your bubble, and you are going to have to turn down tests, and you are going to have to turn down scans, unless you are willing to surrender to the will that is to potentially be labelled high risk. Gestational diabetes check is not great. It does not really tell us if a woman has diabetes because of the check. You can go away and you can research the Cochrane review, who tells you and explains how it's not foolproof and it's actually quite problematic and needs to be improved. And the gestational diabetes is often a diagnosis that's given a woman to be classed as high risk to then be induced, and sows a lot of seeds. You're not going to protect your bubble from that. So I'm not sitting here saying refuse a diabetes check. I'm saying go away and research a diabetes check and make an informed decision around whether you need to have a gestational diabetes check. And if you genuinely had gestational diabetes, what would that look like, right? So there's that. Then, of course, there's protection from other high risk, such as your baby's big. Your baby's big is a card that they like to pull out a lot, or your baby's small, but mainly your baby's big. The only risks with that are shoulder dystocia, and the risk of your baby having shoulder dystocia is minimal, and the risk of that being a long-term issue if they did have shoulder dystocia is minimal. To look at that, to be informed with that, this is again the role of the doula. The role of the doula is to signpost. So you will be signposted to, why would I have my gestational diabetes check? What would that look like? Or what does it mean to have a big baby, and what does that actually look like? So they cannot tell you that you're having a big baby because they don't have a clue what size your baby is, even though they think they do. Measuring your bump and having a scan proves nothing. If it was accurate, then they would have accurate statistics on them getting it right, which they do not. And they're having to send women for MRI scans to really prove the size of the baby, which is insane. So how do you protect yourself? Well, you are by rights, okay, if you're looking at your rights, you shouldn't be having a scan past 28 weeks. If you've had a healthy, easy breezy pregnancy, no one should be having a scan after 28 weeks. But they're giving people scans randomly at the moment. And there definitely wasn't, back in my day, they would only do that if they were like, they did try the small baby card with me, and my baby was £8.4. So they scanned me at, and this is the proof. If you want proof, there's plenty of it, but here's a good example. They scanned me at 41 plus 6 and said that my baby was smaller, we instantly need to induce you. I managed to get a sonographer who I'd had privately because I went through IVF, and she was working in the NHS that day because she dipped her toe in, put me in her room and was like, of course you're not measuring small. Measured him and was like, he's absolutely fine, don't worry about it. On I went, and he was an 8'4" baby. Measuring small at that time. So point proven. So we have to acknowledge that we don't have to accept things. And I think we do, but we do not. So protect your bubble, really think about it. And I like to say to clients, what is your intention for going for that scan? What is your intention for going for that appointment? What is your intention intervention? What is your intention? And then coming back to trust in your body. What do you need? What does you and your baby need? Trust in the body, trust in the process, trust in your knowing. And if there's a voice that says, I trust and I don't need X, Y, and Z, then you trust that and you can say no, and that's a protection of your bubble, and it's a protection to avoid high risk. When I hear that a woman has stepped into a scan or an appointment unnecessarily towards the end of the pregnancy, it makes me go a bit, because if they were planning on a home birth or an MLU birth, they are risking that. You take the risks. You're risking the birth that you want in order to surrender to their request, but you have to question, is their request necessary for me and my baby at this time? So how else do you protect your bubble? The final point I want to make is that a baby's estimated due date is a load of it's made up. It's made up. They have got no clue. And again, the role of the doula is to signpost to how did they get to the EDD? What does that mean? So if you're somebody who had irregular periods before, is it necessarily accurate? An example of this is my own pregnancy and my own birth, and why I'm really angry around everything that happened with my birth at the beginning, from the beginning, because I was hell-bent on an MLU birth, but if you go over 42 weeks in my area, they wouldn't let you in the MLU. Mental. So what did I do? I was like, okay, I'll have sweeps. Sweeps are now given. Sweeps are now offered to women from like 36, 37 weeks as a given. And it's part of their, it's part of Kent's guidelines to offer sweeps in East Kent. And sweeps are part of a cascade and they're part of an intervention. All they do is create really horrible period pains. They're really painful and they do nothing. You could have 6, 10, 20 sweeps and you won't go into labour for it. You can go and have spicy foods. You can go and have your raspberry leaf tea, and you can go and have sex. None of them are proven, and then that includes sweeps. So protect yourself from sweeps. They are unnecessary and they could be part of your cascade. So I was trying to have sweeps, multiple sweeps, to get my baby moving before 42 weeks, just so I could access the MLU. Insane. I look back and I'm just like, I mourn and grieve that pregnant woman who was coerced into that space. So you do not have to accept sweeps, and I would highly recommend that no one accepts a sweep, and that no one has a vaginal assessment at any point, to be honest. But if you are during labour and you choose to have that, then you can choose within your bubble protection to not hear how dilated that they've decided that you are, because dilation doesn't actually mean anything with how far along you are in labour, however much they'll try and tell you that. So in order to protect your bubble, how do you protect your bubble at the very, very end of pregnancy with a lot of pressure on the baby going over the estimated due date, with a heavy-handed, you should be induced, you should have sweeps, teamed with family and friends who are like, why are you still pregnant? Teamed with the fact that you're almost at 42 weeks. And the given is that you should have given birth by now. How do you protect your bubble? Well, you protect your bubble by going into your bubble deeper, your cocoon, your birthing space, your acknowledgement that this is your cave. I came from a farming upbringing. I witnessed a lot of animals giving birth. I birthed a lot of sheep. I've only recently been sharing this with clients because I'm like, is that really wild? But we had I grew up with like 300 sheep and over 250 cows and many chicks and chickens and ducks, and I watched dogs give birth, cats give birth, and many mammals give birth. So when the sheep are in their later parts, you can tell they're heavier, they're slower, especially if they were like carrying triplets or two. You could tell that they were like tired. They would kind of sit separate from the flock quite a lot, and you would be like getting signs that they would be going into giving birth. So you would kind of like witness that, and then they would separate themselves completely from the flock in order to give birth in a corner in their safe space. This is what we should be doing as human beings. The cat goes under the bed into the darkness to give birth. We do not allow for other people to get involved and start asking and questioning why you're not giving birth by now. There are no stats to prove why anyone should be giving birth by 42 weeks. The stats only stack against the medical professionals who believe that the placenta fails after 42 weeks, which is their only thing that they bring up, and it's absolutely bullshit. There's no stats to prove that whatsoever. Placenta does not fail suddenly. Placenta does not fail with like any part of you going over 42 weeks. So we do not accept that language, and we do not allow ourselves to step into their spaces. So in that space, you can keep in contact with people that you need to keep in contact to, but try and avoid ask them outright that they don't ask them if the baby's here yet. They'll soon know. You can avoid midwife appointments towards the end if that's something that you wish, because they will insistently push induction on you and scaremonger you. So you can avoid it. At the end of the day, when all's said and done, what are we all trying to avoid within pregnancy and birth? Having a baby that dies. So we call it the dead baby card. It's the card they like to pull out. You know, they could pull out all sorts of cards. One of them is the dead baby card. And if we're really being really matter of fact about it, and what we're all not talking about and speaking about in this space is, we don't want a dead baby. Obviously not. It's a given. No one wants a dead baby within this space. But why are we perpetually pushing women and the partners into the corner and asking them why they're risking the life of the baby without backing it up with hard stats and proof that they are only doing the best for them and their baby? Anyone that allows their baby to go to full term, and as full term as that baby wants, will only ever give birth to a really beautiful, full baby. But because we live in a society that perpetuates induction and C-section and not going past our estimated due date, it's rare that we see babies who are that beautiful, like scrummy baby, you know, because they ended up giving birth earlier. And then the other issue that we have is that a baby needs to get to a certain point so that they can truly deeply withstand this this really long journey of birth. The woman's gone through 40 marathons, the baby goes with her. The baby needs to withstand that. In order for a baby to withstand that, the baby needs to be allowed to be in the belly and get to the point where they're fully ready. A really good example is that when you get to towards the end of your pregnancy, your body is constantly gearing up and you're constantly on this journey into labour. Every twinge, every Braxton Hicks, every whoosh, every rush, everything is part and parcel of you deepening into labour, so that when you get into labour, you're able to withstand labour, and the baby's able to withstand labour because they've grown to the point that they want to grow to. If we do not allow for this, we do not prep for what it feels like to give birth, so that we do not have that prep of what the rushes, the whooshes, the twinges, the Braxton Hicks truly deeply feel like. So when we go into labour, we're not able to necessarily deal with the pain, because there can be pain within birth, and hypnobirthing has a place but often bypasses the fact that even with the language that you use, although it's already positive, birth is painful. Birth is emotionally and physically exhausting, and it's part of the journey into motherhood. It's rare for you to have an ecstatic birth. Facts are facts. However, if you don't allow your body to prepare for as long as it needs to prepare for, then birth will be even more painful and even more challenging, because we didn't allow the body to do what it naturally, physiologically needs to do. So how do we, again, protect our bubble within that space, within that acknowledgement that we need time to deepen into labour with our babies? So that's as much as I've got today. That is a long video on protecting your bubble, but I'm really, really hell-bent on what it looks like. There's probably loads of other examples, but you can find more support, more doula support, and more holistic pelvic care support on my website. Sending love.